Recording has started?
Just started. Okay, we should be live, and so we'll just let all the participants in. Yeah, if one of the co-hosts can let all the participants in, and then Sridhajita, the floor is yours.
Have you started recording?
Yes.
It is not showing up. Yeah, so we'll start. So welcome to the ASHA webinar series on food, farming and farmers. Today we are discussing this ubiquitous chemical of a very serious concern, glyphosate. And we are trying to get the lessons for India from this webinar. I'm Sridhar Radhakrishnan, and I would be moderating the session along with my colleague Sri Harsha Taneru. As you all know, glyphosate is one of the most controversial agrochemicals debated the world over in the last 2 decades. Initially claimed by agencies to be safer than table salt, and that sounds, what it sounds. It has been classified as probably carcinogenic to humans by the International Agency for Research on Cancer under the WHO, World Health Organization, in 2015. But after the introduction of herbicide-tolerant genetically modified crops in many countries, its use has increased tremendously, and it's leading to a lot of health and ecological consequences. Many countries, regions, cities, counties, they're all taking preventive steps to regulate and even stop this chemical's use. In our own nation, India, on July 7th, the government of India proposed to restrict the use of glyphosate through use only by pest control operators. They invited comments, public comments, and ASHA Kisan Swaraj is one of those agencies groups that sent in its comments. But even this restriction was a consequence of a concerted campaign by various groups like ours. And in fact, the Swadeshi Jagran Manch even ran a massive online petition, which we will hear more from the webinar, because we have one of their leaders come here. Meanwhile, the immediate provocation for the central government's proposal to regulate it actually came from Kerala, my own state, the state where I come from, where it was banned, and it sent a letter to the central government saying we need a national ban. Earlier, various other states, including Andhra Pradesh, Punjab, Maharashtra, Telangana, West Bengal, had various degrees of restrictions and regulations on this chemical. Now, this is the context in which we are having this webinar. ASHA is doing this webinar. A word about the organizers. ASHA Kisan Swaraj is a nationwide network of volunteers working for the promotion of agroecology-based farming systems. We stand for food, farmers, and freedom. We encourage people across who are also participants here to join the network and strengthen the movement towards a holistic, sustainable, and a remunerative farming system in India. In the webinar today, we have 4 highly appropriate speakers who will present scientific evidences and some global and national level experiences as well, from which we will try and draw lessons for India. Before we go into the to the speakers, a small request to the participants. All your questions and comments, please put them in the chat box. And a small request to the speakers. When your time limit, you are 2 minutes away from the time limit, I'll give you a very soft alert, and then you can go on for another 2 minutes, but try and keep time. So I will now invite the first speaker, Dr. Nicolas Defarge is a molecular biologist, basically from France, but right now he lives in Rosario, which is the eye of the center of where genetically modified transgenic crop cultivation happens in Argentina. He's focused on toxicology and ecotoxicology of pesticides. He was previously a researcher at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich in Dr. Hilbeck's team. He was also a member of Professor Seralini's, a very famous Professor Seralini's research team at the University of Caen, Normandy. And various publications he has on the toxicity of glyphosate-based herbicides and the ingredients. And he has a repository of knowledge on health and environment, which I suppose is what he's probably going to talk about today. Defarge is also the vice president of ENSA, the European Network of Scientists for Social and Environmental Responsibility, and is a member of the Scientific Council of CRIGEN, the Committee for Independent Research and Information on Genetic Engineering. So, Dr. Nicolas, please take it.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buen día. Just I will share my screen. Is it okay?
It's not come up, but yeah.
Can you see my PowerPoint?
No. Have you shared it?
Yes.
Should I share this PowerPoint?
Yes, now it's coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have a slide with the city of Rosario near the River Paraná? Yes?
Yeah, we can see it. Please go ahead.
Okay, so good morning. I will present some evidence of adverse impact on health and the environment. I live in the city of Rosario, where glyphosate is banned. I must say that thanks to my wife, who wrote the law to ban glyphosate. And in front of us, we have a large wetland area, which is the delta of the River Paraná. It is a top land for biodiversity, and it provides massive ecological system. The first of all is provide our water. And you will see this is an issue. So the water flows from north Brazil to south, collecting this water from South Brazil, Paraguay, north of Argentina. And if I exactly overlay the map of genetically modified crops, I get the watershed of the Rio Paraná. You can see on the slide, it perfectly match. So what we have as GMOs, well, like in the rest of the world, 80% of the GMOs, more or less, are herbicide tolerant, mostly Roundup Ready, and mostly soy. What means Roundup Ready? It means that the soybean can be sprayed with Roundup, whose active ingredient is glyphosate, without dying of it. It also means that the soybean will contain a high level of glyphosate and its breakdown product AMPA. This is new because theoretically in plants you should not have herbicide. So while there is more, yes, here I can use some pictures of a GM soy field. You can see that at the border you don't have plants anymore. the weeds near the fields, well, are dead due to Roundup, and you see that these pictures is taken around 100 kilometers from my house. Of course, well, these fields are sprayed. You can see an example with this plane spraying. I was told that there is around 6-7 spraying a year. And the other picture shows a big harbor with facilities to transform soil into flour, among other products, which is loaded into large boats. A lot of them will then navigate to China, which is the main country to receive this soya flour. And well, on this picture, really, I wonder if we're still speaking about agriculture or mining. 6 or 7 spraying a year, it means also large volumes of glyphosate-based herbicides, and it is also a huge market. And you know that the major producer of glyphosate is also China now. But my focus is that a large part of these glyphosate-based herbicides will run off into the main tributaries of the river Parana. It will run off to the water. Here I can show I show 2 references by Damian Marino and colleagues having measured the levels of glyphosate found in the stream water and in sediment. There are a lot of other references. They are listed in this worth reading review by Andras Shekax and Bela Darvas. So what is the risk in terms of health and environmental danger of this massive contamination? Well, you know that risk is hazard exposure, and exposure, as I tell you, is very high. Glyphosate is in almost everybody's urine. It is the first active ingredient worldwide with around 800,000 tons a year. And it is a very particular glyphosate because I would say, safety threshold are around 1,000 times higher than for any other pesticides. So exposure is very high. And there are also documented health effects. You will think that, well, sorry, I have some, the exposure is really high, the highest for the workers working in the GM fields. And epidemiology in Latin America brings evidences of genotoxicity so I mean DNA damage, chromosomal aberration in soybean workers. There are scientific publications regarding Brazil, Argentina, and Ecuador. Exposure is also high for the sprayed villages because you can see in the pictures, the spraying doesn't stop at the border of the fields. It also goes, well, on houses and even on schools. So people are sprayed. And there is a large epidemiological study made in sanitary camps in Argentina regarding the pueblos fumigados. It means the sprayed villages. It is an impressive survey by my friend Dr. Vertsenasi, involving over 100,000 people. It is not published in a scientific paper. It was reported to the governmental authorities. And well, Dr. Vertsenati and his students investigated the incidence of cancer, miscarriage, malformation. I can speak. Students investigated the incidence of cancer, miscarriage, malformation. Okay. So I can speak of it outside the presentation, I have a few slides on it. So I can speak of it outside the. Okay. So it is, well, sorry, it is known that especially in vitro, well, what are we exposed to? A Roundup formulation is not only glyphosate. There is, of course, a declared active ingredient, glyphosate, which will inhibit the plant enzyme EPSPS. But you also have co-formulants, which are called inerts, although some are very toxic, like POEA. And you also have, so this we published it 2 years ago, contaminants. Among them, dioxane, formaldehyde, arsenic. And you know that these products are non-carcinogenic. So Dr. Peter Closing will talk about the carcinogenicity of glyphosate, but you should know that in the formulation of Roundup, you already have non-carcinogenic. The point is that for regulatory purposes, only the active ingredient glyphosate is assessed for chronic toxicity. But it is known, especially in vitro, that formulations are far more toxic than glyphosate alone. The toxicity of co-formulants can be very high, and it should account for the toxicity of the formulation in the eye of the regulators, which is not the case today. Well, not only glyphosate should be assessed in vivo for regulatory purposes, but formulations should also be assessed for chronic toxicity. And it was never done at the regulatory point of view. There is only one study assessing the in vivo chronic effects of pesticide formulation. In this case, it was a Roundup, and it is a study that we did. You know this study because it was publicized mostly due to mammary tumors that occurred in females. You can see the difference in the incidence of these tumors with a very low dose of Roundup. It is 0.1 part per billion. It means it is one drop of Roundup within 10 billion drops of water. It is a level that is much lower than what is allowed in the water and much lower than the acceptable daily intake. But well, still in these female rats, my colleague Robin Ménage used the most updated techniques that regulators do not demand to big companies. And he saw that liver and kidneys had been impacted, culminating in non-alcoholic fatty liver diseases. Well, so what does regulation do? Well, regulatory science does not require chronic assessment of the common formulation, but define their safety threshold based on studies performed by the company on the active ingredient alone, in this case, glyphosate. And it is quite funny because, well, a few years ago, the level, the no observed adverse effect levels, was 30 milligram per kilo per day in rats. And then a few years ago, it switched to 50. And last week, the glyphosate task force proposes that the highest dose without any effect is 300 milligram per kilo per day in rats. So I am wondering, is glyphosate getting safer, or are experts getting blinder so that they can no longer observe adverse effects they used to? In the scientific publications, adverse effects below these regulatory safe levels are documented. They are published in this review that we wrote with Robin Ménage. I show you some of them, but you see that you have reprotoxicity, genotoxicity, teratogenicity, toxicity in kidneys, in liver, malformations at dose that regulators claim it is safe.
Dr. Nicola?
So, yes?
You get 2 more minutes.
Okay, so I'll be quick. Just to say that regulatory science is also outdated on endocrine disruption, also on epigenetic and transgenerational effects, and also on effects of the gut microbiota. The PowerPoint is online, so you can read this PowerPoint more slowly at home. I just wanted to go quickly in the adverse effect of glyphosate and Roundup on the environment. Well, effects are known on bees, effects are known in the soil on earthworms, on soil fungus. Also, effect including teratogenicity is known on amphibians. There are several publications by my friend Dr. Lachmanovich. Interestingly, he also studied the synergy that can occur with glyphosate with other pollutants. And well, this point of mixture is also a bit ignored or poorly studied by regulators. And in fact, some colleagues claim that the decline in biodiversity is a consequence of an inappropriate environmental risk assessment of pesticides. So I will thank you for your attention. I just wanted to send a short message from India. It will be very quick. This message is: do not trust the big promises of the big agrochemical companies. It is a business plan. Neither trust when regulators claim it is safe. By allowing large amounts of residues of glyphosate in food and water, they are part of this business plan. Seek for independent scientific information. And I give 2 examples of papers worth reading. And well, we independent scientists are happy to help you see in the dark like we are doing today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nicola. That was quick, short, and was so crisp regarding the toxicity elements of it, the questions of runoffs, agriculture workers being affected, the regulatory system itself being fudged, and including experts having not looking right into the regulatory system. That was an immense presentation. Thank you, Dr. Nicola. I'm sure there will be questions that will come to you after this, after all the participants speak. I will now invite Ishtiaq Ahmed to do a very quick translation in Hindi, as short and as crisp as possible. Ishtiaq?
Yeah, thank you, Sridhar. तो डॉक्टर निकोलस ने कुछ जो बेहद महत्वपूर्ण बातें कही हैं, उनमें पहली बात तो ये है कि उन्होंने बताया कि रोजारियो शहर है, उसके आसपास बीटी बीजों का और ग्लाइफोसेट और राउंडअप जैसे केमिकल्स का बड़े व्यापक स्तर पे इस्तेमाल होता रहा है, और उसका नतीजा ये है कि वहाँ के आसपास रहने वाले लोगों के पेशाब में इन जहरीले रासायनिक तत्वों की भारी मात्रा दिखती है, यानी सामान्य स्तर से या सुरक्षित स्तर से 1000% तक अधिक स्तर तक ये रसायन मिले हैं। उन्होंने ये भी बताया कि इन रसायनों से कैंसर और यानी वॉलंटरली गर्भपात जैसी समस्याओं की बातें सामने में आ रही हैं, इनका असर दिख रहा है। इसका असर सिर्फ जो लोग हैं उन पे नहीं, बल्कि पेट में पल रहे बच्चे के स्वास्थ्य पे ही पड़ता है, और पर्यावरण पे भी इन रसायनों का बेहद बुरा असर पड़ता है। मधुमक्खियों, मेढकों और कई अन्य जीवों की संख्या में लगातार कमी आ रही है, और जैव विविधता जो है पूरे इलाके में, उस पे बहुत बुरा असर दिखना शुरू हो गया है। ये सिर्फ एक जगह की बात नहीं, उन्होंने बाकी जगहों के बारे में भी यही बातें बताई हैं। और उनका कहना है कि भारत के लोगों को सिर्फ कंपनियों द्वारा किए गए बड़े बड़े वायदों और दावों पर भरोसा नहीं करना चाहिए, बल्कि उनसे वैज्ञानिक जानकारी की मांग की जानी चाहिए, और इसको आंख मूंद करके बिल्कुल भी नहीं इस्तेमाल करना चाहिए। धन्यवाद।
Somebody is sharing a screen. Can you get him to remove this? And please cut down everybody's options to screen share except the speakers very quickly. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, so now I will invite our next speaker. Thank you, Ishtek, by the way. And I'll invite the next speaker. This is Dr. Peter Klossing. Let me introduce him. Dr. Peter Klossing is graduated as an agronomist at the University of Leipzig, earned his doctoral degree in 1974, and he became a board certified toxicologist in 1988. He held positions at 2 research institutes in former East Germany, spent 3 years as a postdoctoral scientist at the US FDA's National Center for Toxicological Research, and was employed as a senior toxicologist in the pharmaceutical industry from 1997 till he retired in 2010. He was a member of the Pesticide Action Network Germany since 2014, served as its executive board for 4 years till 2019. He's published 65 articles in peer-reviewed papers and has 4 book chapters in the area of toxicology. Dr. Peter Klossing.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope everybody can hear me well. I'll try the screen sharing now. Yes, I think everybody can see it.
Not yet.
I will focus
It's not yet, Peter,
Sorry?
it's not yet come.
Say it again.
The screen share has not yet come.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now?
it's coming up. Yeah, you can put the full screen mode. Yeah, started as a presentation. Yeah, good. Please go ahead.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak here, and I will focus on a very specific, very narrow aspect, but a very important one of glyphosate toxicity, which is the carcinogenicity of the active ingredient. Even that is denied by the authorities, and we will have a closer look at this. But before we start doing this, and even though my presentation is relatively short, I think it will be good to see from where we are going, starting, and where we are going to end, what I call charting the glyphosate territory. As you heard in the presentation, and you have seen it, of Nicolas Defarge, there are many other effects glyphosate can do. Actually, one thing also mentioned in Nicolas' presentation was the effect on the flora of the gastrointestinal tract. you should know that glyphosate has been patented as an antibiotic, but never used because of the side effects, fortunately. And at least in Germany, it is well known that glyphosate is the major perpetrator for a massive loss in biodiversity. So we are talking about a loss in a long-term experiment over 40 years. We are talking about a loss of 70 to 90% biomass in insects, and glyphosate has a significant responsibility in this, not because it is particularly toxic for insects, maybe except for the gastrointestinal tract of bees, but because of eradicating the food for insects. So they are disappearing because of lack of food in these agricultural deserts without any weeds. But I will concentrate on carcinogenicity, which has a specific significance. To understand this, I will talk about risks and hazards, how they are assessed in Europe. I will briefly go into the details of the evidence for carcinogenicity and how the authorities, at the end, I will talk about how the authorities are twisting the evidence. I think it's important to understand why it is so significant whether glyphosate is a carcinogen or not. And as I said before, we are talking about the active ingredient. In Europe, we have a special legislation, which is called the hazard-based approach. Actually, I think I can point out a little bit here. And according to this legislation, a ban is required if long-term effects are recognized as probable for humans. And this includes carcinogens, mutagens, and teratogens. And from the regulatory perspective, the evidence for glyphosate that it is carcinogenic is best known. And that's why I'm concentrating on this. So I'm contending that glyphosate should have been recognized as a carcinogen by the authorities already in 2015 and 16. And this combines with the huge amounts released into the environment. And if a ban would have been issued in the European Union, or hopefully will be issued at the time point of reassessment in 2022, this, number one, will send a strong signal to other regions of the world, like South Africa, of course, too, but South America and India and other countries. But it will also have consequences for the import of agricultural products. In other words, agricultural producers in these other parts of the world who want to export compounds to Europe will have much lower maximum residual limits accepted than it would be accepted if it was not officially a carcinogen. So the worldwide amount of more than 800,000 metric tons per year was already mentioned by Nicola, which says two things. Number one, the sheer amount is describing the powerful health impact you can expect from it. And number two, it's the best-selling pesticide in the world. And you can imagine that there is a strong economic interest behind that to keep it on the market. So let's have a quick look how carcinogenicity is assessed in Europe, and how it is, how pesticides in general are assessed. It's not just for glyphosate, the active ingredient, but we have the approval to market any pesticide active ingredient or formulations containing this active ingredient in Europe. Needs a proper assessment if it was done proper, yeah. And as I mentioned before, if it is carcinogenic, mutagenic, or has a label of reproductive toxicity, it would be banned. And this is the so-called hazard-based approach I mentioned before already. For the carcinogenicity assessment, there are three different aspects, three different elements. One are so-called regulatory studies of 18 to 24 months of the duration for in rats and mice. And the official consideration is if there are two studies with positive effects, then the compound should be labeled as probably carcinogenic in humans. As additional evidence, we have scientific publications, which is mainly with regard to so-called mechanistic evidence. I will talk about this in a few minutes. And the third element of evidence are epidemiological studies. If the compound has been used long enough, then typically there will be studies of the disease pattern in exposed humans. And this will also tell additional stories about the hazard which comes from the compound. And according to the official view, if you have a significant increase in the number of tumors in at least two different independent studies, as I said, then you would call the compound as carcinogenic. On the other hand, we have the precautionary principle officially declared in Europe, but almost never applied, which means in case of scientific doubt, you should take precautions and go to the safe side. And I will skip the weight of evidence aspect because I'm afraid I will run out of time at the end, and we'll rather have a look at what the authorities have been looking at in the 5 mouse carcinogenicity studies which were available for assessment in March 2015. And based on these results, they came to the conclusion that glyphosate is not a carcinogenic hazard because within these 5 different studies, there was only one study with one tumor type, which was significantly increased as compared to non-treated animals. The problem was that the WHO's International Agency for Research on Cancer had another approach, did actually another type of statistical assessment of the tumor incidences. And this different type of assessment is actually recommended by the OECD guidelines, and the result looked like this. So you have 5 different, the same 5 mouse studies, but just with a different statistical and recognized statistical evaluation. You have increased tumor incidences in all 5 mouse studies, and you have even in different tumor types increased incidences. So this is something I would call a strong evidence, which in addition is supported by so-called mechanistic evidence. One is, or the 2 mechanisms mentioned by the IARC, by the WHO's agency, is oxidative stress and genetic toxicity. I think I don't need to dive into genetic toxicity because Nicola has already talked about it. The other aspect is oxidative stress, which can be seen in these, if you apply the proper analytical tools, which can be seen in experimental animals and which can be expected in humans too. So glyphosate in the body creates highly reactive oxygen molecules, which essentially are nothing unusual if they are in our body in small amounts, because metabolism of our food is permanently generating a certain amount of these oxygen molecules, which are able to damage the DNA and the cells and could be able to cause cancer in this way. But there are specialized enzyme systems which inactivate them in due time. So under normal conditions, there is more or less no problem. But we call it oxidative stress when these enzyme systems are overwhelmed by chemicals in our body which are not supposed to be there. And glyphosate is one of them. And I remember that one question sent to us in advance was, how does glyphosate come into our body even when using personal protective equipment? There are two very important studies recently published, which shows that glyphosate is not only by spray drift in these terrible airplanes, as Nicola showed in his slides, but there is strong evidence from Germany that glyphosate is distributed over very large distances of more than 1 kilometer, because it's attached in the soil to very, very fine soil particles, which are then blown into the area and inhaled by normal people. I think this is one major concern and a major explanation why you can find glyphosate in the urine of persons who, even under European conditions, use only organic food. They eat food which is supposedly free from any pesticides, but they still have almost the same level of glyphosate in their urine in one study performed in Germany. So this was a quick answer to one of the questions. The other additional evidence is epidemiological studies. There are two meta-analyses which are summarizing existing evidence, and this actually is not from South America, where exposure in Brazil and Argentina is extremely high to glyphosate, but just from Scandinavian countries and also from the US. And it shows significantly higher risk for tumors of the lymphatic system, in particular non-Hodgkin lymphoma, but also myeloma. So my personal assessment, and I should re-emphasize, I'm talking about the active ingredient and not the formulation with all its terrible additional compounds in it. As an active ingredient, I would consider it glyphosate as a weak but absolutely proven carcinogen. And the IARC, the agency of the WHO, calls it strong, referring to the evidence, not to the strength of carcinogenicity. I would claim that tobacco smoke and benzene and many other compounds are much stronger carcinogens but it's the sheer amount already mentioned of 800,000 metric tons annually, which makes the problem. And other chemicals, as I try to explain with a reference to benzene and tobacco smoke, benzapirins, are 2 times, 3 times higher the risk of getting, maybe even more, the risk of getting tumors. Based on the existing epidemiological studies, the assessment is that the glyphosate increase of risk is about 50%. So the authorities abused all kinds. I'm not sure whether, can you advise how much more time I have? I'll just shut up and decide whether I go quickly or in detail.
Yeah, Dr. Peter, you have about 3 minutes more.
Okay, then I think I can go in a little bit more detail. When the authorities were confronted with this increase of tumors in the 5 different mouse studies, they claimed, based on a so-called weight of evidence, weighing evidence in one area against the other one, that's what they did not do, but weighing the evidence within one area of consideration, which is looking at the mechanistic evidence, looking at the different mouse studies. They always claimed, based on this weight of evidence, it may be, but is not likely that glyphosate is carcinogenic. To do this, I cannot go too much into detail. They violated, for arguing, they violated their own guidelines and guidance documents. They claimed the doses were too high for a carcinogenicity study in these mouse studies I was talking about. Essentially, there is no dose limit for carcinogenicity studies. As already mentioned, they used wrong statistical methods to make the increases in tumors disappear, and they abused so-called historical control data. I think something which I will not go into detail. And another very interesting method I call self-reference. So there are people in different boards, in different assessment groups at the Food and Drug, at the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization. They are sitting somewhere else in the EPA in the US, and they all claim, or some of them claim, that glyphosate was not carcinogenic. And then at the end, they point to each other because not only we have said this, this other organization, this other advisory board has said the same, and based on this, they add 1 and 1, claiming that it is 2, but actually they have been adding 0 and 0 and claiming that it is 2. That's my personal opinion. So finally, the question at the end.
Dr. Peter, you may have to rush a bit.
Yeah, I'll do. The question is how to go into the future. I think we should unite the struggle to ban glyphosate, and carcinogenicity is just one reason. And at the same time, keep in mind that glyphosate is not the only pesticide. And I personally think that agroecology and a just society is the solution to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter. That was extremely detailed into just one aspect of it, but you sort of covered not just the aspect of carcinogenicity, but the whole aspect of how science itself, in some sense, gets sabotaged. And that is an immense understanding, because that's almost the same thing that we all sort of face in our own countries with whatever minimal studies that we come up. And we being an organization in the heart of raising some of these concerns in this country, we completely understand what you have done, presented. I would, like to also show my great happiness in your last slide, which actually showed that we all need to come together to tackle this globally. Terrific presentation. Thank you, Dr. Peter. I think I'll now invite Ishtiaq to try and do as much justice in translating him. I know it's tough, but do try that, Ishtiaq.
Yeah, I'll try my best, because it was quite a fantastic presentation and so many things. And yeah, so मेरी कोशिश होगी कि जितनी बातें कही हैं डॉक्टर पीटर ने, उसमें से ज़्यादातर को हम आप तक पहुंचा सकें। शुरू में बीच में मेरा इंटरनेट भी चला गया था, इस वजह से बहुत सारी चीज़ें रुक गई हैं। जो चीज़ें हमने नोट की हैं उनमें पहली चीज़ है कि किसी भी मॉलिक्यूल को कार्सिनोजेनिक या कैंसर कारक बताने के लिए 3 तरह के अध्ययन किए जाते हैं। एक तो होता है कि चूहों पे उनका क्या प्रभाव पड़ रहा है, दूसरा होता है कि दूसरे जगह क्या अध्ययन हुए हैं उनका हम लोग रेफरेंस करते हैं। तो इन्होंने बताया कि 1983 में जब पहली बार इस तरह की जांच हुई चूहों पे, तो उसमें आया कि ये पूरी तरह से सुरक्षित है, किसी तरह की कोई पॉजिटिविटी नहीं दिखाई दी। लेकिन 1993 में जब दोबारा से ये जांच हुई तो ये चूहों के लीवर पे और दूसरे अंगों पे इसका प्रभाव दिखने लगा। लेकिन उसके बाद की जांचों में ये भी दिखने लगा कि ट्यूमर्स भी पैदा होने लग गए और ट्यूमर्स बढ़ने लग गए। तो इनका डॉक्टर पीटर का ये कहना है कि शोध कई बार होते हैं तो उनके जो आंकड़े हैं उनको सप्रेस किया जाता है या उनमें छेड़छाड़ की जाती है, और जो वास्तविक आंकड़े हैं वो सामने में कई बार नहीं लाए जाते हैं। डॉक्टर पीटर का ये भी कहना था कि ये ग्लाइफोसेट में जो मॉलिक्यूल्स हैं या जो केमिकल्स हैं वो डीएनए को प्रभावित करते हैं, और इसकी वजह से कैंसर होने की संभावना लगभग 50% अधिक तक बढ़ जाती है। हाल ही में उन्होंने बताया कि जर्मनी में एक शोध हुआ, उसमें कई किलोमीटर दूर तक ये केमिकल्स जो हैं बहुत बारीक धूल में मिल करके दूर दूर तक पहुंच रहे थे और लोगों को प्रभावित कर रहे थे। ऐसे लोगों को भी जो कि आमतौर पे रसायन मुक्त भोजन करते हैं या जैविक भोजन लेते हैं, उनके पेशाब में भी ये जहर कारक तत्व मौजूद पाए गए। इनका कहना है कि ये आमतौर पे इसको कहा जाता है कि ये कमजोर कैंसर कारक है, लेकिन इसकी मात्रा इतनी ज्यादा इस्तेमाल होने लगी है कि उसकी वजह से इसकी वजह से कैंसर काफी भारी मात्रा में बढ़ने लगा है। डॉक्टर पीटर ने यह भी बताया कि जब शुरुआती दौर में हो रहा था तो एफएओ और एनवायरमेंटल प्रोटेक्शन एजेंसी जो यूएसए की है, दोनों ने कहा कि ये एकदम सुरक्षित है। लेकिन बाद में जब अध्ययन से ये पता चलने लगा कि ये जहरीला है और ये कैंसर कारक हैं, तो दोनों एक दूसरे पे आरोप लगाने लगे। अंत में इनका कहना है कि ये एक फैक्ट है, अब मानी हुई बात है, माना हुआ तथ्य है कि ये कार्सिनोजेनिक है, ये कैंसर कारक है। लेकिन उसके साथ में एक और बात उन्होंने कही कि ये इकलौता खतरा नहीं है, बहुत से दूसरे इस तरह के जहरीले तत्व पर्यावरण में हमारे अभी डाले जा रहे हैं और उसका खतरा बढ़ा हुआ है। और उन्होंने उपाय के तौर पे यही बताया कि एग्रोइकोलॉजी ही इसका एक समाधान है, यानी कुदरती ढंग से की गई खेती ही इसका एकमात्र समाधान है। बहुत धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Ishtiaq. That was quite a good capture. Now let me invite the next speaker, Dr. Suman Sahai. Dr. Suman Sahai, let me introduce her. She obtained a PhD from Indian Agricultural Research Institute in 1975. She has worked in the University of Alberta, the University of Chicago, and the University of Heidelberg, and where she got a habilitation in human genetics. She has published over 40 articles, mostly on policy issues, very closely worked on the policy-related issues on genetically modified organisms, has been cited over 150 times. She's the director of the non-governmental organization called Gene Campaign, very active in India. She is the recipient of the Order of the Golden Ark in 2001, the Borlaug Award in 2004, and Padma Shri in 2011. So Padma Shri, Dr. Sahai, please. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you can maintain that tone.
Okay. So how do we do with the slides? Can Rohit, can you do that for me, or
He is already doing it.
Okay.
You just have to say next.
Next. This goes back to the time when we used to say next for slides.
Yeah.
All right. Now we need to understand why this trait was developed at all, and there was a legitimacy to it developing it because of the conditions of agriculture, particularly in the US, but also in other countries where weed control in large land holdings was getting difficult because of lack of agricultural labor. And because weeds were considered a nuisance and had no use. So therefore, a technology was required to control weeds in 1,000-hectare farms, etc. The next one, please. So the glyphosate or the herbicide tolerant strategy or technology had good acceptance when it came about in the US, in Europe, etc., because it addressed a specific problem to agriculture in those conditions. However, for India, it's completely idiotic to have a technology that will displace labor, because that was the whole point of herbicide tolerance was that you don't require labor to control weed. And in our country, where we are a labor surplus country, to bring in a technology that will displace labor is completely incorrect and counterproductive. Apart from that, we don't consider plants as weeds. In our fields and forests, weeds have many uses, and destroying them with chemical herbicides definitely will deprive rural communities of valuable resources. Next one, please. Next one, Rohit. Apart from that, weeding is an income source. So let's go back. Let's go back. It's an income source, and the plants that are collected, let's go forward. I'm going to stick my finger up when I want to change. Next one, please. That's it. So we eat a lot of vegetables, leafy greens.
Rohit, previous one, and stay there.
When I lift my finger, Rohit, then change.
Just.
All right. So we stay here. So we have fodder issues. We need fodder, and we have leafy greens. All these weeds are extremely important resources in our context, and therefore herbicide tolerance to remove all of these leafy greens, the supplementary fodder, and the medicinal plants is so completely counterproductive. I was a member of a committee on medicinal plants in the Ministry of Environment, which also had a big batch of India's best Ayurvedic physicians. And they made one plea repeatedly: please change your agricultural practices so that they do not destroy the vegetation along fields, because those are sources of medicinal plants for us. And this is something that even the practitioners of Ayurveda had submitted to the ministry at that time. This is some years ago. Now, if you take me to the next slide, this is what we assume, and this is what is known. So Gene Campaign did a CAP study, a knowledge, attitudes, and perception study on GMOs. And we looked at many aspects of GMOs, amongst which was also herbicide tolerance. Now, this was a study conducted in 5 states. And I'll show you just one slide. Rohit, watch my finger, please. And this is this slide. We approximated herbicide tolerance in the sense that we did not want to use GM jargon so as not to bias anybody's response. And in the farming community, when the question was posed in all of these 5 states, that would the farmers want to use chemicals that would ease their problem of weeding, but would also have these kind of additional consequences. And you can see for yourself how the farmers responded on all counts, on medicinal plants, on fodder plants, on leafy greens, and if mixed cropping was not possible. If you see the next slide, you will see that overwhelming 80 to 90% farmers said that they do not want to use a technology like this. Now, I'll show you in the next slide why this is important. Because rural and farming communities depend on that biodiversity to a very, very large extent. Now, the big argument in India has been, and I think in other parts of the world also, on validating the technology through pure science, science-based evidence. You'll hear this repeatedly. It's safe. The science says it's safe, and therefore it should be accepted. But our attitudes and perception study shows that the science is one part of it. In this case, we know that it's also not safe. But even were it to be safe, the collateral damage that a technology like this would cause is not acceptable to farmers. And therefore, it's completely illegitimate to use the science-based evidence as reason enough to introduce a technology and then to trash opinions that have expressed themselves to the contrary by saying that if it is safe by science, who are you to object? So this kind of evidence shows you that people, farmers who want to cultivate these crops, do not want this technology. Next one, please. The next one. Now we find that not only does glyphosate have an impact on human health, the carcinogenic, and the 2 previous speakers have highlighted that in great detail and very well, but we also know that the fundamental ways in which glyphosate acts has very, very wide-ranging consequences. And this is so typical of what happens when industry gets involved in the development of products like this. If you remember the Condragan episode and the pharma industry, the Condragan episode was when these teratogenic properties of Condragan were known, and yet the pharma industry released that as a tranquilizer or as an anti-anxiety drug for pregnant mothers. And then after 9 months, there was a spate of children who were born without arms and legs, and Europe knows that very well. In my years in Heidelberg, I saw that when children came to the university. So that is what happens when you are developing a product. You know what the side effects are, but you release it nevertheless. And this similar thing has happened with glyphosate also, as happened with Condragan. Now, this is a study that was done on what happens to soil nutrients when glyphosate is applied. This study on alfalfa showed that once glyphosate was applied in alfalfa fields, minerals like this, and you can read the slide, were reduced. And the reason why they were reduced were because of the chelating effect of glyphosate. The next one, please. The next one, Rohit. All right, now we know that glyphosate molecules chelates with minerals. Chelates means chemically sticks to them and makes them unavailable. So when glyphosate is applied, no, can we go back?
Rohit, one step back. Rohit.
Thank you. When I lift my finger up like that, only then. No, not.
Rohit, the next slide. Next slide to this. No, there is always a, Suman, there is always a time delay. Yeah, that's why. Rohit, the next one. And stay there. So
when the glyphosate molecule chelates with chemicals in the soil, these chemicals, these minerals are vital nutrients. And then when these vital nutrients are taken away because of the chelation with the glyphosate molecule, it becomes unavailable to the plant. No, can you go back, please?
Rohit, one step back. and stay there.
So these minerals help the plant to fight off disease. Now the soil is full of all kinds of pathogens that attack plants, but having access to these minerals allows the plants to fight these diseases. So when glyphosate chelates with these minerals and removes them and makes them inaccessible to plants, these pathogens which attack the plants have a field day, and there they can destroy the plants who have now no protection mechanism available to them. So if you have examples like Pseudomonas and Bacillus groups of bacteria, which live around the root systems. The next one, Rohit, please. Thank you. So when the Bacillus and the Pseudomonas is floating around the root systems, these facilitate the uptake of plant nutrients, and this allows the suppression of the disease-causing organisms. So when the Bacillus and Pseudomonas groups are also taken away by toxicity of glyphosate, then it makes the plant even more vulnerable. So on the one hand with the chelation, on the other hand with the direct toxicity to the bacteria. It has been found that glyphosate also interferes with photosynthesis, reduces water use efficiency, and shortens root systems. Shortens root systems because it attacks those bacteria that keep the roots healthy. And therefore, overall, the crop health is affected. And we will see in another slide how badly it gets affected. Glyphosate itself is slightly toxic. Can I have the next one, please? Thank you. So now this is how glyphosate toxicity is visible. This is wheat fields. Short-term use is the first slide where you see that after 1 year, the wheat is still reasonably healthy. And after 10 years of glyphosate use in the wheat fields, this is how your crop looks. Seriously impoverished, shows toxic effects, shows the nutritional deficits, and this is how the crop itself starts to wither away after prolonged use of glyphosate. The next one, please, Rohit. Thank you. There is the sudden death syndrome, which was recorded in the US. That should read the US Midwest, where serious serial applications of glyphosate showed that in a range of crops, not just in wheat, but in corn and in soya and in many other crops, that plant diseases became a really major issue because of glyphosate use, and plant disease incidence skyrocketed. The next one, please, Rohit. The superweed problem is understood very well because of the resistance. But what we are now understanding is also that the superweed effect is more, not so much directly due to the glyphosate toxicity or resistance building, but the fact that the soil-borne pathogens have been enabled, as we saw in the earlier two slides, that because of the chelating agent and because of the toxicity to healthy and friendly bacteria, the weeds become even more resistant because there's nothing to control them. So they are both, there are dual reasons why you have a development of superweeds: direct resistance and resistance through the fact of removing pathogens. Next one, please, Rohit. Not just on the soil.
Sumanji, you have about 2 minutes now.
Right. This is the last slide. So it also has a direct impact on human and animal health. You've heard about the carcinogenicity and its toxicity, but also increasing evidence that because of the chelation, because of this chemical sticking together and removing of essential minerals from the soil and depriving the plants of those minerals. Now, what's in the soil is what the plants will take. If it's not available in the soil, the plants can't have those minerals, and therefore the plants are weakened. And so minerals like the ones that you can read here, iron, zinc, copper, etc., which are essential to healthy plant life and which then help to build the vitamins, etc., in the plant, which are necessary for our health. Enzyme systems, vitamin systems, these all get affected because of the removal of essential nutrients from the soil. And one example that is being discussed increasingly is Alzheimer's. Because of the reduced copper and magnesium, again due to the chelation from the soil and impoverished plants, the USDA has done a study of a number of plants showing how the nutritional component with its minerals and vitamins has declined steadily over the years for a number of reasons, accelerated in the last years by the glyphosate application as well. And that is my last slide. The carcinogenic properties have been discussed at length. But these are also some of the other insidious ways in which animal and human health is being impacted by the application of glyphosate in agricultural fields. There is no question of having to do away with this technology. It doesn't work at any level. It doesn't work at the level of enabling biodiversity to be used by rural communities. And it does not work at the level of being a serious health hazard to plants, to animals, and to humans. The last slide is just one of references. And if you could show that, then we can end this. Thank you, Rohit. Right. All right, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Suman Sahai. That was, it's interesting to see that, the first presentation was largely focusing on the toxicity, ecotoxicity aspects more of. The second presentation did cover carcinogenicity in very well detailed, picked up carcinogenicity and then did it detail. But you took something very, very of great concern to farmers as well. Because two, three things that I would probably pull out of your presentation is the question of why is something that the US can answer. But for us, it's more like why it shouldn't be, first of all, in a condition like India. The second big question is that, if farmers knew that you had collateral damages, they wouldn't probably want to take it and do it.
Yeah.
But the bigger question that probably we are also facing is that this question of collateral damage or studying collateral damage or looking at collateral damage possibilities of a chemical is also not done by our scientists in any sense. And that is very strange. Plant ill health itself is a big concern for farmers, and that's something which I think the farmer, people among our participants and those who are listening should probably be understanding that US has also faced all this, issues related to farming itself and the crop itself and the soil health in largely, and that's something that you well brought out in your presentation. So thank you, Dr. Suman, and I will now invite Ishtiaq to do the translations.
धन्यवाद श्रीधर. तो पद्मश्री डॉक्टर सुमन सहाय ने एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दा जो अभी बताया, वो ये कहा कि यूएसए में इसका इस्तेमाल हो रहा था क्योंकि वहाँ पे लोगों की कमी थी, श्रमिकों की कमी थी. वहाँ के लिए ये एक समाधान हो सकता है, लेकिन हिंदुस्तान में जहाँ पे श्रमिकों की बहुतायत है, वैसे में अगर इस समाधान का इस्तेमाल करते हैं तो हम बड़ी संख्या में लोगों को बेरोजगार करेंगे. एक तरह का सामाजिक संकट भी हम इससे पैदा करने जा रहे हैं. इसके अलावा उन्होंने कहा कि हमारे यहाँ जिनको वीड कहा जाता है बाकी जगहों पे, हमारे यहाँ उनके कई सारे इस्तेमाल हैं. जैसे वो खाने में इस्तेमाल होते हैं या फिर दवाओं के तौर पे इस्तेमाल किए जाते हैं. हम इनको अनकल्टिवेटेड क्रॉप्स के तौर पे इस्तेमाल करते हैं, चारे के तौर पे, और आमदनी का एक स्रोत है हमारे लिए. तो उन्होंने 3 सालों का एक अध्ययन किया 5 राज्यों में, और वहाँ पे जब किसानों से ये पूछा गया कि आप क्या किसी एक ऐसी तकनीक का इस्तेमाल करेंगे जो इन तमाम तरह के खरपतवारों को ख़त्म कर दें, तो उसमें 80 से 90% किसानों ने कहा कि हमको ऐसी तकनीक नहीं चाहिए, क्योंकि ये बहुआयामी बर्बादी करते हैं और इसको स्वीकार नहीं किया जा सकता है। अगला जो उन्होंने बहुत महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दा उठाया वो ये था कि इससे जो मिट्टी में मौजूद पोषक तत्व हैं, जैसे नाइट्रोजन है, फॉस्फेट है, पोटेशियम है या मैग्नीशियम, यानी सल्फर और आयरन की मात्रा ये 52 और 49% तक कम कर देते हैं। तो वैसी स्थिति में जब मिट्टी में पौधों पे हमला करते हैं तो पौधों के पास अपना बचाव करने के लिए ताकत नहीं होती है, पौधे कमजोर हो जाते हैं। उन्होंने गेहूं के खेत की तस्वीरें दिखा करके बताई कि 10 सालों में क्या असर पड़ गया, गेहूं के खेत किस तरह से खराब हो गए और पौधे किस तरह से कमजोर हो गए। उन्होंने अगली बात जो बताई वो ये कहा कि फोटोसिंथेसिस की जो प्रक्रिया होती है उसको भी ये बाधित करता है, और इसी तरह से जो पौधों के अंदर पानी का संचार है उसको भी ये बाधित करता है। इस तरह से हम देखते हैं कि पूरे पौधे का विकास बाधित होता है, और सुपरवीड की समस्या है और उसका एक भी कारण उन्होंने बताया। लेकिन अंतिम बात जो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात ये बताई उन्होंने कि जब मिट्टी में पोषक तत्व कम हो जाएंगे तो पौधों में भी नहीं होंगे, और पौधों में नहीं होंगे तो हमारे भोजन में भी नहीं होंगे। तो उन्होंने बताया कि ये हर तरह से, चाहे वो कंज्यूमर हो, चाहे किसान हो, चाहे प्रकृति हो, सबके लिए ये समान रूप से नुकसानदेह है, कैंसर कारक है। वो तो पहले भी दो वक्ताओं ने बहुत स्पष्ट रूप से बताया है। इन्होंने बताया कि 1990 के मुकाबले अभी अल्जाइमर की बीमारियां लगभग 9000% बढ़ गई। बस इतनी बात हमने नोट की। धन्यवाद।
Dr. Ishtiaq, let me tell you, that was a very, very justifiable, capture of what Suman Saha said. Very well done. Thank you very much for that. Before I invite the next speaker, let me just request all the earlier three speakers, Dr. Nicola, Dr. Peter, and Suman, to quickly, you can, while the other discussions are happening, you can also scan through the chat box and see, and there are a number of questions coming up, and we are also posting questions from the Facebook. So you can take a quick look at it and choose the questions that you really want to answer. That will, in fact, make the whole process easier. When we'll call you for the concluding, statements, you can probably address those questions. So I would request you to do that. Thank you very much. And now let me invite the next speaker. Dr. Ashwani Mahajan. Ashwani Mahajan is in fact a good friend as well. Is a national co-convener of the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. It's an Indian political and cultural organization. It's affiliated to the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. He's an author and columnist. He's an associate professor at the PGD AV College, Delhi. He's the chief editor of the Journal of Contemporary Indian Polity and Economy since 2011. He's a visiting professor and research guide at the Pacific University, Udaipur, and the Mewar University. He works as a researcher and activist on World Trade Organization and other international trade agreements, has attended 3 ministerial conferences of WTO in Geneva, Bali, and Nairobi, and he's represented the Swadeshi Jagran Foundation, which is an accredited NGO with the WTO. So, Dr. Mahajan, please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this enlightening discussions. In fact, I look at glyphosate issue from the point of view of the GM crops. In fact, the very reason why I took up this issue to bring it to the public domain in India and try and create more awareness was my attachment to this whole issue of GM crops. Recently, in fact, Dr. Suman Sahai was talking about the multiple issues related to, very rightly she said, how it is impacting the whole agricultural ecosystem in the country. how it is impacting the availability of medicinal plants, how it is impacting the livelihood, how it is impacting the overall health, apart from impacting environment and so on. In fact, recently I attended a book launch function held at RIS, in which RIS had come out with a framework about the socio-economic impact of GM crops. In fact, why I'm talking about GM crops along with this whole issue, that 85% of the GM crops are globally are herbicide tolerant crops, and that is the reason why the Roundup and the glyphosate is increasingly being used in the world. And their attempt is that such crops should be introduced in India as well. And we are also seeing the efforts of illegal spread of HTBT, their attempt to introduce HT mustard, HT canola, and all sorts of HT plants they are trying to bring in. So in that meeting, very interesting things were happening. They were talking about that is something it's very, very essential to think about the socio-economic impact of the GM crops. Then everybody was, because all that lobby was, I'm sorry to use these words, but all that lobby was sitting over there, including the member Niti Aayog, Agriculture, then S.R. Rao, and so many people. I asked them a simple question, that you are talking about the socio-economic impact. Have you really gone into this aspect of the impact of glyphosate usage and herbicide usage on the availability of our SAG, which is providing nutrition to our people and is providing livelihood to our women? Have you looked at it from the point of view of availability of and our biodiversity? They were blank because they had never thought of it. Then I brought in the questions rather, which were put up by the technical expert committee before the Honorable Supreme Court in the ongoing court case on GM. The technical expert committee has raised very pertinent issues like scientificity of your claims. Our previous speakers have talked at length about the scientificity, at the lack of scientificity in this regard, whether it is GM crops or it is the glyphosate. The livelihood issue, the health and environment, conflict of interest. These are and I told them that all you people are sitting here, can you say on oath that you had not taken benefit from the companies whom you are promoting? So these are some of the issues which must be, as a preamble to what I want to say. I just have mentioned about that this whole issue of glyphosate is some way related to the GM crops. And while understanding this issue, I raised this matter through an ongoing petition, online petition, on which 1,93,000 people have already put their signatures. And in fact, the whole issue could be brought to the limelight because of the reason that more than 125,000 cases, legal cases, are already pending in various courts of US, and a lot of compensation is being given to those people, those who have been the victims of glyphosate. And the company, now the Bayer company, which has taken over Monsanto, is offering more than $10 billion in as compensation. So then I looked upon the whole issue from Indian perspective, and I found that in rural areas, the villages, those who have never seen the incidence of cancer for decades, they were facing a sudden spurt in the cancer, incidence of cancer, and many people, they were facing huge problem, and they were all poor people, not even able to afford the treatment for cancer. So as a responsible citizen, I tried and to bring it to the public domain, and I got a lot of support from my organization, got a lot of support from the MPs and social activists and even medical professionals. And sometimes, you know, when people when people try to oppose you or try to work against what you are doing, they also help you. When recently, sometime back, our honorable Minister of Agriculture made a very funny statement in the Parliament, and when he said that there is no incident, there is no evidence available that the pesticides and herbicides like Roundup, etc., are of any cause any impact on the health. And so we wrote a letter to him. What is this? Why are you going against the scientific evidences also? Everybody knows that pesticides and herbicides have got a negative impact on health, but why are you saying so? But that also helped us in bringing this issue to the public domain. And then recently there has been a useless order or you can say notification for restricting the use of glyphosate in India, and saying that it can be used only by the registered um, uh, vendors or registered pesticide companies. So registered users can only do it. So then we wrote yet another letter, and we sent an objection to that notification, and we told that because of this excessive usage of glyphosate, out of 61 million acres of land, 33 million acres, the areas infected by the glyphosate resistant super weeds have increased from 33 million acres in 2010 to 61 million acres in 2012. So respected Suman Sahaji was talking about it, that about the emergence of super weeds because of the glyphosate. So in the end, I would like to say that I while agreeing with my previous speakers, what we need to do is that bring more and more scientific evidence, and at the same time create awareness amongst the agriculturists and also the non-agriculturists and the lawmakers, and force the authorities to put a final ban on the glyphosate. I think that would be the greatest help to the mankind we can do. I must say that this glyphosate has been the most controversial and the most controversial, you can say, the chemical in the recent times. So thank you very much for giving me a patience hearing, and let us all work together to get rid of this deadly chemical. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. I think, this is very important because we have had two speakers bring a global scientific science and experience. And Dr. Suman Sahai, as somebody in the chat was also saying, she brought in the Indian context and some of the studies that they did in India. You brought in the concerns of a lot of us. And in fact, you raised it. You have also described how your organization raised it within the government. Because in some sense, you are a group which is close to the government, and you're doing your best to try and draw the attention of the government into such concerns. So I think my thanks is for both of it, for coming here and making this presentation, and also for the role that you're playing in trying to bring some sense of sanity and safety into this food and agriculture systems in India. So thank you very much. And I must say that Dr. Ashwani was also very critical, very important in bringing this issue to the fore, especially with that online petition, which, as he was saying, had a great reception in the country. And obviously, sharply also saying that the current notification that the government has brought out is a useless notification. Absolutely true. And in the chat, we are also sharing the link to that notification and the link to the response that ASHA Kisan Swaraj has given. So those who are interested can quickly take a look at that as well. So thank you, Dr. Ashwani. And let me now ask Ishtiaq to translate it as quickly.
अश्विनी जी ने एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात जो बताई वो ये है कि जीएम और ग्लाइफोसेट को अलग करके नहीं देखा जा सकता है, इसलिए ग्लाइफोसेट एक बहुत बड़ा मसला अश्विनी जी और उनके संगठन के लिए है, क्योंकि जिन देशों में एचटी और बीटी या दूसरे जीएम बीजों का व्यापक इस्तेमाल हो रहा है, उन्हीं इलाकों में ग्लाइफोसेट का भी बहुत ज्यादा इस्तेमाल देखा जा रहा है। उन्होंने सुमन जी की बात को और मजबूत किया कि साग है या फिर महिलाओं के रोजगार हैं या जैव विविधता के मुद्दे हैं। इसके मामले में आमतौर पे लोग चुप्पी साध जाते हैं, जो वैज्ञानिक तथ्यों की बात करते हैं वो लोग भी बिल्कुल खामोशी इख्तियार कर लेते हैं ऐसे मुद्दों पे। उन्होंने अगला जो बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा सामने में रखा है वो है कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट का। उनका कहना है कि बहुत सारे लोग जो नीति निर्धारक अभी हैं उन जगहों पे हैं, उनको कंपनियों से किसी ना किसी तरह से लाभ मिलने की या तो उम्मीद है या लाभ मिलता है, इस वजह से ये मामला बहुत ही कॉम्प्लेक्स हो जाता है। उन्होंने एक और बात कही कि जब उन्होंने पिटीशन साइन कराने की मुहिम शुरू की तो अभी तक 1,93,000 लोगों ने इस पिटीशन पे यानी ग्लाइफोसेट के खिलाफ पिटीशन पे साइन किया है। इन चीज़ों के खिलाफ अमेरिका में सैकड़ों केस चल रहे हैं और कंपनियों को कई बार हर्जाना देना पड़ा है। और हमारे हिंदुस्तान में जब हम जाते हैं तो गरीब किसानों और गरीब लोगों के बीच में कैंसर की घटनाएं बढ़ी हैं और उनके पास ये सामर्थ्य भी नहीं है कि वो अपना इलाज ढंग से करा सके। तो वैसे में ये एक बहुत ही बड़ा सामाजिक संकट के रूप में उभर करके सामने आ रहा है। उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि डॉक्टर हों या राजनयिक हों या संगठन हो या एनजीओ वाले लोग हों, ये सब लोग इस मामले में बहुत खुलकर सहयोग कर रहे हैं। यानी ग्लाइफोसेट और जीएम के खिलाफ जो आंदोलन है उसमें उन्हें भारी सहयोग मिला है। उन्होंने ये कहा कि पिछले कई सालों में सुपर वीड की मात्रा जो है, यानी जो इम्पैक्टेड एरिया है उसका 3.3 करोड़ एकड़ से बढ़ करके 6.1 करोड़ एकड़ हो गया है। यानी ये समस्या एक बहुत भयावह रूप लेती जा रही है। और उन्होंने कहा कि इसके लिए बहुत जरूरी है कि हम ज्यादा से ज्यादा वैज्ञानिक तथ्य सामने लाएं और उन्हें उजागर करें, और साथ साथ किसानों में जागरूकता पैदा करें। जो नीति निर्धारक हैं उनके बीच में भी जागरूकता पैदा करें, और राजनेताओं के बीच में भी ये जागरूकता पैदा करें। उनका मानना है कि अगर हम ये कर पाते हैं और ग्लाइफोसेट और जीएम जैसी तकनीकों को रोक पाते हैं तो ये मानवता के लिए सबसे बड़ा काम होगा। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Ishak. And I think that was also a good translation. I'll now very quickly invite my co-moderator, Sri Harsha, because he has compiled a few slides, which is just information on the status of glyphosate in India. I'm sure a lot of people would be interested to know what is the update as far as India is concerned. Sri Harsha Taneru works with the Kisan Mitra helpline and at the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and he volunteers with the RSV and ASHA on agriculture issues. So Sri Harsha, please.
Yeah, hi. So am I visible?
Yeah, you're visible. You're
audible also.
Please continue and make it fast.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for staying until now and listening. So I want to quickly go through the status of glyphosate in India. And so if you see, this is some data we have compiled from the government sources of what is the production and consumption of glyphosate in India. If you see the total production in the year, for example, 2018-19 is 6,684 metric tons. But what was consumed locally is only 680. This shows that a lot of production is actually being done for export, which is it's also a sad state which we are pushing into. And also the herbicides, if you see out of all the herbicides which are produced locally, glyphosate is the second highest quantity. It is around in 2014 it was around 9,690 metric tons. Now it has increased to 660. It is after that it has remained constantly, but it is in second place. The present status of HT crops in India: no HT crop is approved for commercial cultivation in India as of now. A lot of scientific communities and scientists and various parliamentary committees have warned against the cultivation of HT crops. HT mustard, the permission also was put on hold. HT soybean, we have found that the cultivation was being done in Gujarat, which was not approved. HT cotton is the biggest issue, where even though there is no the application was withdrawn, but we have seen rampant illegal cultivation of HT cotton across India. Many states like Maharashtra, Telangana, Gujarat, these have a very huge amount of HT cotton being cultivated. In 2020-21, approximately 20 to 25 lakhs hectares of area is being cultivated. In Telangana, for example, last year, the state where I am, the government doesn't have any data. So in the a lot of data, other data shows that around 30 to 40% of land was cultivated with HT cotton. So this is a huge issue, and the major the glyphosate resistant gene which is being used in this is owned by Monsanto, which is now Bayer. 1 second. Yeah. The other interesting point is, okay, fine, we are looking at what is being cultivated. From a food angle, if you see, though the testing here in India is very bad, and a lot of scientific effort and consumer effort has to be put onto that. One example from, I think Tony Mitra is a very famous person who has compiled a lot of reports on the poisonous foods of North America, is a report he has come up with. In that, we have seen that if the FSSA has the limit of 10 ppb, but what we have seen is, as you can see, various exports, exported food which is tested in Canada had very high ppb limits. For example, organic masoor, which is highlighted, has around 295 ppb, right? In this way, very high ppbs of glyphosate was noticed, which is a huge issue. So it also shows that it is going across into other foods, and which is not really safe. The other major issue, I think so, even our foreign speakers would want to notice this, is as pointed out in the chat, around 40 countries have currently a glyphosate banned. How they use glyphosate in those countries or other agrochemicals is also, a lot of machines or, flights and various other, with a lot of equipment, they go in on spraying. And still, we have noticed that, people are affected with cancer and various other things. Here we are looking at, people who can't use, we live in a tropical country where we can't even use this heavy protective equipment, which is being pushed on by the companies. So given that scenario, it is very difficult for our farmers and agricultural laborers to actually use any protective gear. So there's nothing you can blame it on them. So a lot of people are exposed to this. There are 23 deaths in Maharashtra in 2017 due to inhalation poisoning of glyphosate. The sad thing is there is no antidote for glyphosate. One case where I was live witness in a hospital in Telangana in Adilabad district was where one woman consumed glyphosate, and she was there in 15 days in hospital. But after she got treated totally, and she was coming back, and she had a relapse of the whole this thing, and she actually died. Right. So there is no antidote, and it's a lot of people are affected. And you can see, as in this photo, this is a photo from a tribal place in Niyamgiri Mountains in Odisha, where tribal farmers, without any knowledge or sadly their this thing, are mostly pushed to work in such conditions. Yeah. So.
Yes, Sriharsha, can you speed up? Sure, done. Yeah. So the present status of restriction on use of glyphosate, as you see, 4 states in 2018, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Telangana, and Punjab have really said that we would restrict the sale, restricted sale of glyphosate. Sadly, this restricted sale of glyphosate also is not implemented. As I said, in last year in itself, we had a huge area being cultivated with HT cotton using glyphosate. In 2020, Kerala took a stand and said that we have to stop the sale of glyphosate, and also has requested, but sadly, because of the neighboring states which are surrounded, it does enter in. And it being also a tea growing state, there is the issue. Hence, they also have written to the central government to ban glyphosate in total. After that, the union government has come up with a draft notification which says, I think so, which Ashwani Mahajan ji has actually explained a little, which is of no use, the draft notification in itself, which says that no person shall use glyphosate except through pest control operators. Yeah, so the pest control operators are nowhere found in the rural areas, and it's a huge issue. The initial time was for 30 days, that was for August 8th. It has been extended until October 8th as of now. The draft in itself is useless, is what we want to point out, and it would just increase more corruption, more mushrooming of PCOs in rural India, which is not at all required. All we require is the effective ban, and that is what we are collectively we should collectively work towards.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can unshare this or stop sharing this. Okay, so thank you very much, Sri Harsha. And now I think we'll just go straight into the question answer session. One of the problems that I right now have is that we are about 1 hour 45 minutes since we started this. And I think we'll have to unfortunately wind up in another 15-20 minutes. It's been quite a long set of presentations. So what I'm going to request our panelists or speakers is one by one. I'm sure that you have looked at all the questions. I also saw Peter, Dr. Peter, answer some of these questions or give opinions on these questions. So I'll start with Dr. Nicola, and we'll go one by one. I request that all of you take about 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes each and not more, to quickly be able to address some of the questions that have come up in the chat. There's a long range of questions, a number of things that have come on the chat. So that's why we didn't go one by one, because we wouldn't really have the time to do that. And we would also probably be able to we'll have to come back to you to get answers for some of these questions at a later point of time. But at this point, I think I'll request all of you to spend 2 to 3 minutes each in the same order that you spoke to address some of the questions that have come up in the chat. So I now request Dr. Nicola to start.
Well, yes, I can provide reply to some questions. One recent was, well, I was challenged about the effects in the soil organism or arthropods, for example, honeybees, and also earthworms. Well, regarding earthworms, you go to look for the publication by Johan Saller. It's very clear that commercial formulations are much more harmful than glyphosate alone. Well, so go to see for the paper for Johan Saller. Honeybees, well, also commercial formulation have higher adverse effects. And well, it is the same in most rat studies. It's really different if you start with young healthy adults, and if you go with larvae, for example, the impact will be much higher with larvae than with insects. Another point, you should not only look for death. There are effects which are called sublethal effects. So it will be impact on the cognitive abilities. Do the honeybee go back to the hive, and so on? There are a lot of effects that really impact the bees, but well, which don't kill them. Well, so this is one point. Yes, I have in mind a question that we had yesterday. Someone wanted to mix paraquat and glyphosate, well, to overcome the toxicity of glyphosate. Please don't do that. In my mind, paraquat is much more harmful. This is a point. Another point I talked about interaction. Well, we are all exposed to mixture of pollutants, and there are, in some instances, synergistic effects. This is poorly studied in regulatory science, but I know about a recent paper that claims for synergistic effects of glyphosate and paraquat on the kidney, on the kidneys. So please don't do that. Well, I prepared also, but we didn't have yet. But we had the questions by the organizer, which are the criteria used by regulatory science not to take into account significant effect. So I think that with Peter, we should talk about this, but a bit later. I can give the flow.
Dr. Nicola, I think, see, I have a feeling that, I am actually overwhelmed by the questions that have come up now. And I really do not know how to, take all these questions and be able to answer. I think ASHA, the organization that I am part of, will have to sort of sit again and think about how we can, probably produce a document with all your help to address some of the questions that have come up, at least generically address. So thank you very much, Dr. Nicola. Dr. Peter?
You're welcome.
Yes, I try to answer a couple of questions more or less by heart. There was one more, which I think was quite interesting and important, about the metabolism and about the exact mechanism concerning carcinogenicity of glyphosate. I already mentioned that oxidative stress is one mechanism. Actually, the authorities even accept that, now I go into detail, the inhibition of mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation by glyphosate itself and not by any metabolite of it is a possible mechanism for oxidative stress. I think it's not the place to go into the molecular details of this process. So the take-home message is, it's although AMPA, aminomethyl phosphonic acid, is the main metabolite, glyphosate itself is the major molecule in addition to AMPA for the toxic effects, and there are no important other breakdown products, to my knowledge, that would be considered significant in this regard. So maybe I've used up my 3 minutes.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Peter. I think I just have to repeat the same thing. I think you'll have to probably help us answer some of these questions that have come up. There has been a lot of very science-based questions on health and ecotoxicity concerns there. So we'll have to probably deal with that a little more better. I now invite Dr. Suman Sahai. Dr. Suman?
Yeah. So one underlying thread that I detect is that, if you don't use glyphosate, what are you going to do to control weeds? And I think that question needs to be addressed. Broadly, that question needs to be addressed. And my answer to that would be that there is no easy way out of the chemical trap that we have gotten into. We know of what happened in Punjab. It's been quoted everywhere, the so-called cancer train, which has brought the impacts of excessive, dangerous chemical use in agriculture to cancer hospitals. So we know that we've gotten into this trap and there's no easy way out. The only way out of this is to somehow create an advantage to weeding, as was the case before. So we're looking again at agroecology or natural farming, name it what you will. But I think we need to get back. One way would be to create the linkages, as I was mentioning, the Ayurveda physicians, is to create linkages with local Vedyas, where the herbs that are used for medicinal properties can be monetized. Similarly, leafy greens can be monetized in local markets. I mean, we all eat the sag. None of us are so fancy as to be living off carrots and beans. We all eat sag, and I hope that we will continue to do that. And I hope that more and more people will do that, because that's the one way to affordable, healthy lives. Similarly, with the fodder plants, you can use this for composting. The government has got this big thing on composting, and if there is support for that, there are X number of ways in which you can monetize what you're calling weeds, which I think in any case is a completely asinine definition for us in India. we have never considered weeds, and we shouldn't stop this definition now. So my answer to what do we do for an alternative to weeds is to utilize them. Utilize them gainfully, monetize them, make it an income source, make it a compost source, make it a medicine source, and make it an income source for weeding. And I think that's the way to go again.
Yeah, that's something. See, Dr. Suman, so I think you pointed out to something very critical, that you're looking for solutions which are given in a platter, while all the solutions have already been there on the ground for us.
Yes.
And you're always looking for the platter, and you're looking for outside places, somebody to come and deliver a solution.
Poison pill that you want to use.
Exactly. So, see, I just want to announce now that when we planned the glyphosate seminar, we also knew that there will be questions that will come up on the alternatives. What else? So next Friday, that is 25th, same time, we are planning a large webinar on weed management, where practicing farmers will be, and also experts on the field, will be coming and telling us how exactly we can do that. So that should probably answer many of the questions that have come up on what else, what next, what other thing can we do in terms of weed management. So that will be, I wanted to mark the time, 3:30, 25th, Friday. So this, and we'll also put up a poster at the end for all of you to note down the dates and probably register. We'll also send the registration details later, soon after the meeting. So thank you, Suman, for that. And I think before I invite Dr. Ashwani, because I know that Ashwani will have some things to say in conclusion, but I would want, there's been a question, of all the questions that have come up, there's been a question to me. And this is very strange, because I'll read the question, and this is what I want Dr. Ashwani to answer. I'm not going to answer because I'm just a moderator. So it says, "Dear Sridharji, you are doing a great disservice to Indian farmers. We have problems of residues of insecticides and not herbicides in our produce. Glyphosate is the herbicide of the century, and we need to save it to posterity by effective and efficient use rather than banning it to harm Indian farmers." Now, Ashwani, you are one of those persons who took up this whole campaign on banning glyphosate. Do you want to answer the question? Dr. Ashwani? Dr. Ashwani is not there, he's gone.
Yeah. I'm joining.
So you heard my question, no?
Yeah.
It's put on me.
Yeah.
And now I wanted to answer it.
In fact, I'm very happy that this question has been asked. Because, you see, we live, and for happy living, we need the food which is free from the diseases. My wife has undergone cancer, and it took a long time to really treat her. We were fortunate enough that she could be saved, but everybody is not so fortunate. The way this incidence of cancer is rising in India and globally, we need the food which is free from pesticides, which is free from herbicides. Despite all that, despite the use of these herbicides, glyphosate, even today our farmer is so very poor that the per capita income in the rural areas is 23,000 rupees, and in the urban areas it is 2,90,000 rupees. There is a difference of 12.3 times. So it is all happening because of the costly inputs, and that has come through these these practices which are leading to a high cost of production. Dr. Suman Sahai has given a very right answer, that the problem in India is not of the weeds or elimination of weeds through the usage of herbicides in the glyphosate. We should try and find uses for that. And in fact, we will be doing a disservice to the mankind by eliminating the nutritional sag, by eliminating the useful herbs, by eliminating the medicinal plants, which are the collateral damage through this. And that's the reason why, while knowing very well that the use of herbicide, use of the glyphosate has been on rise in India, and this is reducing the cost of cultivation, cost of removal of the weeds, and therefore saving some 100 rupees or 1,000 rupees for the farmers. I asked my farmer friend that, did you know that this glyphosate usage is going to cause you, or can cause you cancer? He said, I came to know very recently, while the incidence of cancer was on rise in my village and villages around me. Therefore, we should think over it. And as you have rightly said, that we need to think about the weed management, proper usage of these weeds, so-called weeds. Our weeds are not actually unfriendly weeds. They are all for humans, and they have been in use for thousands of years in India.
Yeah.
And we should not go for monocultures. If we keep using glyphosate, then mixed cropping will not be possible.
Yeah.
If we keep using glyphosate, then it will not be possible for us to really have a balanced kind of nutrition. And monoculture has been the major cause of concern for all of us. And thank you very much for asking this question, because glyphosate is not the chemical of the century.
Yeah.
It is a chemical which is deadly. It's a chemical which is a known carcinogenic, and scientific evidences are showing it. Today's seminar has given a lot of evidence for the same, and this we must try to educate our policymakers in this regard, and we are trying our level best to do that. And I'm very hopeful that within 6 months glyphosate should be banned in India.
Ashwani, I think, Dr. Ashwani, I think that is almost a national policy that you have put out on this matter. I hope it is. I hope you will be able to drive it. I hope, and please understand that we are all, in it with you on this. So thank you very much, Dr. Ashwani, for joining us. Now, before I get into the last, few sentences that I have to say, one of the earlier presenters, Sri Harsha, has said that he needs to make a correction to one point he said, and I'll just read it out. He said that he wrongly said 27 people died due to inhalation poisoning due to glyphosate. Actually, it was only 2 people due to glyphosate, and the rest were to other chemicals. And that's the usual problem here, that you have a decoction of chemicals, and when you want to epidemiologically, want to point out to certain to look at which of them are a problem, it's always difficult to do that. So that is a correction that Sri Harsha wanted me to do. So thank you, Sri Harsha, for pointing that out. Now let me wind this up, the meeting. And before I sort of go to my last thing, I just want to say that, see, this session has been an immensely useful session for somebody like me and a lot of others also here. Basically, because it's probably brought out a number of dimensions of this very pertinent problem, a global problem, in fact. And in our thing, we sometimes say omnipotent, omnipresent is usually reflected on gods, but nowadays it's different. Omnipotent, omnipresent in the wrong side, in the wrong direction, is sometimes pesticides and chemicals and herbicides. It's all over the place. It's in your blood, it's in your water, it's in your food, it's in your land, it's in soil organisms, everywhere. And that is the disservice that the chemical industry, the pesticide industry, the herbicide industry, the glyphosate industry is doing to this nation and to the world all over. And collectively, just like we got rid of persistent organic pollutants, we really need to get rid of this. I don't think any of us have doubt on that. So with that concluding sentence, let me go ahead and thank Dr. Nicola, Dr. Peter, Dr. Suman Sahai, Dr. Ashwani Mahajan for coming and spending time with us to explain to this nation all that you've, the work that you've done in terms of in explaining, in understanding glyphosate. Sri Harsha, I thank you for the update and helping me moderating the session. Ishtiaq Mohammed Ahmad for the translation. Kapil Shah, I must specifically thank you for this meticulous, intellectually laborious coordination that you have done. Kavita for being the background, but building up the foundations for the seminar and all the other odd jobs that you did today. Rohit for the technology management and our background supports. Thank you very much. Ajay, Naveen, Anantu, Akash, Priyanka, Vinyasa, specifically Priyanka, Vinyasa, Ajay. A lot of thanks for you because wonderful volunteering. Thanks to all who participated in the session and through other social media platforms. Thanks to all the friends who shared the live stream through their social media platforms as well. Thank you all. We have one last announcement. Rohit, if you can just put the last slide. I also apologize from our part for not being able to take up all the questions that you have put up, but you will see us probably addressing this in various kinds of documents. So keep following ASHA Kisan Swaraj, either through its Twitter or through its Facebook or through its website, because it's important that we are continuously updating on this. And this announcement is regarding the 25th September meeting at 3:30. We have weedicide free farming, science, practices, and policies. The next in the ASHA webinar series on food farming and farmers. So with this announcement, I thank you all once again for the support that you give all of us, and specifically to me as a moderator. Thank you very much.
Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, Suman.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.